Steve, and we're going to talk a little bit about foliar nutrition. So let's get this ball rolling. Thanks again for everybody attending, and let's get started. So want to talk a little bit about last March, or in March, I guess, Steve talked a little bit about microbes and digestion following the food, plant growth promoting rhizobacteria and their function, and the rhizophagy cycle. And then in April, Mark talked about soil nutrition, testing and don't guess, and the importance of looking at our soil nutrition and figuring out our deficiencies or our excesses and going ahead and making those corrections. And we look at this as a program, as we always say here, that it's not a product, it's a program, and all of these things have to come together. So today I want to talk about how do we build upon what we've talked about? How do we build upon the soil biology? How do we build upon the soil nutrition based on availability and balance? And then how do we adjust that based on accommodating the plant's need based on foliar applications? So with that being said, so often Steve, whoa, easy computer. So often Steve talks and relates to human health as it is so close related to plant health. And that's really true. It's true. Everything from our age, our diet, our stress levels, our gut bacteria can affect the amount of vitamins and minerals that our body can actually absorb. And we start to talk about that and think about it, we need to apply that also to the plant. When we think about the age of your plant is going to dictate what we're going to feed it based on its timing, based on its growth, based on reproduction. The diet is going to change also based on plant need. If we're under plant stress, we need to look a little bit about what nutrients can help reduce stress in the plant and how we use that nutrition in order to get us through those stress periods. And then digestion, soil digestion is going to have a huge effect on nutrient availability and what that plant can absorb. So really, they're both really kind of related. And so with that being said, let's talk a little bit about foliar nutrition. I call foliar nutrition as the new norm. We need to look at foliar nutrition as being every bit as important as soil or a microbial inoculum. It's part of our program. I'm not going to talk today about whether or not foliar nutrition works. I'm not going to talk about, the 1 pound of foliar fed nitrogen is an equivalent to 4 pounds of soil applied, because from my experience, foliar nutrition works in every situation with every plant. The exception to that rule is how we do that foliar nutrition. So often I talk to growers, and that's really what I built this presentation around, was the conversations I have had with growers and some of the comments that I receive of, I tried foliar and it didn't work. If you tried foliar nutrition and it didn't work, we have done something that is not correct based on either the form of nutrition we're using, what we're feeding the plant, timing, application. There's a lot of things that can come into why foliar nutrition doesn't work. And that's what I really want to talk about today to make sure everybody is successful on how we do our foliar applications. Because as I say, it is the key to getting to that point of high yielding, high density, good value crop and reducing stress off our plant every time we produce a crop on it. So with that being said, let's go back to test, don't guess. As I said, foliar nutrition should not be considered a substitute for good soil fertility management. And I already talked about the management. Biology, balancing that nutrition, that has to be the basis, a foundation of all of our agricultural programs. And then we supplement with our foliar application. Thereafter, we have done that soil application, we can then adjust deficiencies during the season based on a timely, and I say timely, plant sap, tissue analysis, leaf extract analysis, and field scouting. And a lot of times talk about field scouting. Field scouting should be done on a regular basis, but I'll talk a little bit later of why field scouting by itself, we should not come up with a foliar application based on what we think the plant needs and do that application, because there's some corrections that we could actually make that we visually can't see in that plant or may not be being expressed by that plant. And then once we make those decisions based on a plant sap or tissue analysis, we then can find the nutrition that we want to use on a timely basis. And it may be a soil and a foliar applied application relevant to the nutrient needed. So we need to look at, when we're doing a tissue or plant sap analysis, we're going to make foliar nutrition recommendations. But at the same time, we also may be making a soil application, because they go hand in hand and they support each other throughout that growing season. And those corrections need to be made based on plant availability, plant need, and how that plant will respond based to this specific application. So with that being said, you know, so often we talk about the limiting factor as being the least available nutrient within that soil environment. And I, excuse me, and I look at it based on the fact that it's also the excess, which can cause a greater problem, and I'll give examples of it today, than what the deficiency caused. Bruce used to refer to it as yo-yoing the nutrition. You would see a deficiency, you would apply an excess of that deficiency, and we would throw everything else out of balance. So the staves on the bucket are constantly moving up and down depending on what we're applying. And so what we really want to do is, how does this nutrition function in balance based on need? And that's really what Bruce referred to as the yo-yoing of the nutrition. So why is foliar important? You know, I talked about age, I talked about diet, I talked about stress level. So I want to get a little more into that and have us think about foliar nutrition in a little bit different way. So when we have young plants, we're obviously not going into, in most cases, reproduction. We want to look at, we're in the growth stage. We want to eliminate the stress off of that plant. When we go into a new orchard and we're planting a new block of trees, you know, the soil application and the corrections done early are very important. That root dipping and that inoculum of that biology around that root to help support that root mass is critical. But then we need to support that plant with the foliar application. We do not have an established root mass to support that tree, possibly in the way that we want it to supply nutrients to that plant. And so we have to accommodate with foliar nutrition. When I talk about foliar nutrition, I'm not only talking about the top part of the plant, I'm also talking about the roots within that soil environment. So we have to look at what things are going to give us as much top growth as they also are going to give us bottom growth, so we're supporting a healthy plant. You know, we're looking at phosphorus, we're looking at a little bit of nitrogen, we're looking at the trace minerals. In a lot of cases, we're not going to have enough leaf to begin a tissue sample or a plant sap or leaf extract analysis early. So let's start that foliar program. As I always say, feed weekly with nutrition that we know is needed by those young plants. And the same holds true when we talk about a heavy crop load. So often when we go into reproduction, most often what I get from growers all the time, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking about beans, peas, wheat, corn, apples, cherries, sizing is very important. Filling out that crop, test load, weight, all of these things are very important. So when we have that perfect growing season and we have a very heavy crop load, we need to make sure we fill that. So often I hear, you know, I had a lot of fruit, didn't make a whole lot more money this year because, you know, pack out wasn't that great because I didn't get the sizing I wanted. That is all directly related to nutrition and timing of that nutrition and application. And this is where foliars carry us through. It's a very important that when we see we have that heavy crop load, we start with our foliar applications based off information and data, tissue, plant, sap. We have the information and feed that crop based on need. And the thing I want to point out here also is we need to remember, for an example, in fruit trees, not only are we trying to grow a heavy load of a crop, but we've already are determining next year's fruit set on that plant. So if we're taking all the energy from that plant and all that nutrition to build and grow this year's crop, how are we suffering for next season's crop? And we start to talk about, we so often hear the term alternate bearing fruit. So that's all based on nutrition. If we can take care of that plant, give it the nutrition it needs to support that heavy load, and also give it enough nutrition to build next year's crop, we can reduce the variability. And I always say what we want to do is have our 10-year average of yield go up, our 5-year average. And that is where foliar nutrition can make that correction and really carry that plant through. So these are all things we need to talk about and add into our idea or our mindset based on why are we doing foliar applications. When we talk about soil imbalances, obviously nutrient tie-up, what's not available based on deficiency within my soil environment, and what is happening based on poor digestion. And this all goes hand in hand, because I have seen numerous soil analysis where we have a deficiency within that soil that we think is going to be expressed in that plant, but with good soil digestion, we notice that that deficiency is where the plant's getting everything it needs. But if we have a soil imbalanced and poor digestion, we're not going to have that digestive properties within that soil and make that nutrient available. And therefore, foliar nutrition will carry us through as we're building soil health. It gives the plant what it needs. It puts those root exudates into that soil environment and actually enhances building soil health through that microbial community within that soil environment. So we want to talk a little bit drought and environmental stress. You know, so often we can predict when we may see, based on rain events, when a crop may go into a drought type scenario, especially with dryland farming, maybe not so much with irrigated. Is there something we can go out and do as a foliar to help reduce some of the stress and get that plant to carry through that drought point until that next moisture event comes? And a lot of times that's only a few days that we need. And we have to look at, based on foliar, what does that plant need? It's obviously not a salt-based fertilizer. That's going to just significantly enhance your susceptibility to that drought. So let's put foods that will reduce stress in that plant. Your kelps, your fish. Let's use something that's going to reduce stress in that plant and carry it through that, that stress point and make the plant feel okay. And the same holds true when we start to talk about excessive moisture. Same holds true. We have a low oxygen within that soil environment. We've saturated that soil. Our biology isn't functioning. Our roots have shut down. Let's get out there as soon as we possibly can to get energy back in that plant so that it can start photosynthesizing again. Generally, excessive moisture is gray, cloudy days. We're not getting the photosynthesis we want in that plant. Let's put things out there to increase photosynthesis. Let's get energy in that plant. Let's get it moving. Let's get those exudates again going back into that soil environment. So all of these are things we can add to our toolbox when we start to think about what things can I do foliar, why should I do foliars, and how can I reduce stress? Because we all know that stress is directly related to crop loss. So if we can reduce stress in the plant, we can increase yield. You know, a prime example of environmental stress, I had conversations with growers in Colorado this week. They had a frost event, which was pretty significant this year. Cherries, peaches, apricots in the Palisade, Grand Junction, Delta, Redlands Mesa, all of those areas got hit pretty hard this year by an unusual frost. Got down to, I believe, 17 degrees at full bloom. So a lot of those guys are saying, well, you know, we're pretty much done for the year. Well, we're done based on this season's crop, but let's take our thought process into what can I do nutritionally that doesn't cost a lot of money, that I can go through there and set myself up for next year's crop. And a lot of that has to do is let's make our corrections. We always talk about we lack calcium in the plant, or we lack phosphorus in the plant. Let's take an idea and a regimented schedule of building those things in that plant now while we're not carrying a heavy fruit load. Let's make that correction not only in the plant, but also in the soil to build us up for the next year. We all talk about cooler temperatures and understand, you know, phosphorus deficiencies, all those things that might come in. And a lot of times we see that, I see it, for an example, in wheat and corn in the Midwest, and even here in Washington State. We're not getting the nutrition we need early, which actually can be a critical point of influence, that V3, V4 stage, where we're setting up our yields for that year. It's a great time to pull a tissue analysis and go out there with a foliar application, make that correction within that plant. Just, you know, is one more tool in that box to get us to where we want to be. And my point is here, so often we just think of foliars as a nutritional correction based off a tissue or a plant sap analysis. We need to broaden our thought process on how we can use foliars to benefit us in a lot of other scenarios other than just basically nutritional correction. Because in all of these things, we're really doing a nutritional correction, but we're helping that plant grow.
Well, and Dennis, you're talking a lot about the nutritional side. Is there a biological components for our Phylosphere, for our foliage, that we can see an improvements by applying some of those beneficial bacteria?
Yeah, every time we look at a foliar application and reducing stress, and I'll just label it as stress on that plant, that plant is more willing to share its sugar or its root exudates back into that soil environment. So I see one of the quickest ways to build soil health is through a good foliar nutrition program. Again, they both go hand in hand. And I see that when so often when we do cover crops, we put a cover crop in to basically build that microbial community, build soil structure, build stable aggregate within that soil environment, and help make nutrient available. But if we put in a cover crop and we don't do anything nutritionally to support that cover crop, how much are we really helping based on that biological community? So again, a nice foliar application in our cover crop to make any corrections that we might have based on deficiencies is a wonderful tool to use. And I'm not talking that we have to spend a lot of money. Generally, foliar applications can be very low cost based on plant need. And we can make huge differences within that soil environment of doing exactly that, Steve, building soil health. And the greatest thing is building microbial diversity within that soil environment. And as I always refer to, we want to build soil structure. Quickest way to do it is through dead microbial biomass within that soil environment. I really, truly have seen that. And also there's a lot of research out there right now that is going to support that information.
Well, and some of that research is starting to go into the phylosphere, the tissue, the foliage of the plants, and we focus so much on the rhizosphere, the rhizobacteria, the plant's rhizome, but there's also starting to be more research into those organisms that live on and around the leaf tissue, and some of the research is showing a higher efficiency of uptake of other minerals and nutrients on the foliage, on the leaves themselves. We can also have some of those organisms become endophytes and help fix nitrogen out of the atmosphere. And especially, you mentioned some of those drought stress times, some of those stressful times. Research is showing that those Phylosphere bacteria growing on the tissue of the plant helps it regulate and modulate how much moisture it's going to be losing. So during those drought stress times, some of those beneficial bacteria, not just in the soil, but also on the leaf tissue, can help protect that plant and work it through some of those stressful times. And we're also finding a lot of the induced systemic resistance benefits with those Phylospheres bacteria as well, because the leaf tissue has receptors on the surface to help kind of let the plant know who's there. And when it senses some of these bacteria, it can adjust its its genetic response and help protect the plant. So it's pretty incredible, and the research is just kind of starting to come out on some of those benefits.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, and we'll talk about a little bit about that as we move through this presentation of the importance of anytime we're doing a foliar application to make sure that we do a foliar inoculum with that application, not only for nutrient availability, but for, as Steve talked about, a lot of other reasons. And so often when we look at foliar, and you've all seen this slide before. These were the Asian pears that I did some work with back in 2016. And the reason I bring this up again, so often it goes with this, just the last slide I talked about. So often we talk about making foliar nutrition when we see a deficiency being expressed in the plant. And obviously we see a deficiency being expressed here in the plant. So immediately visually by scouting, we know, okay, I need to do a foliar correction here. These plants need something. What do I need to do? And this is where it goes to test and don't guess. So I want to talk a little bit about the grower was being told that this was an iron deficiency in the plant. They applied iron, 2 or 3 applications of iron, weren't seeing any plant response. Kind of the conversation then went to the idea, well, you're organic and they're not responding to the form of iron that you can use, so we have to go to a different form of iron, but it's not organic certified in order to make the correction. And that's when I started talking and taking a look at the orchard, and I said, I really don't think it's an iron deficiency. I think it's manganese and zinc, manganese being the ones expressing the yellow or the deficiency in the plant. So we pulled a tissue analysis on these plants, and as you can see, we were deficient in manganese, we were deficient in zinc, but our iron was at 593 parts per million. So we were getting excessive iron in that plant, and we weren't getting what the plant really needed, manganese, zinc. And when we see that, and we start to see that that excess in an application, one of the things I look at is, okay, now we've made ourselves more susceptible to insects and disease. We've placed that plant under a greater amount of stress by trying to do something good based on a correction, but using the wrong application or the wrong tool in order to fix the problem. The other thing we see about this, when we start to get high iron, we start to restrict the availability of phosphorus. It doesn't show here on this slide, but we were also seeing a phosphorus deficiency on these plants. And so as we made our correction, the phosphorus came up, the manganese came up, and the zinc came up. They were all related. So again, it goes back to the idea of where an excess can cause a greater problem, or at least as large of a problem as the deficiency itself.
So this was through mostly foliar. Was there a soil application component to this that you think helped as well, Dennis?
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Steve, because I talked about so often when I look at a tissue sample, plant sap analysis, leaf extract analysis, I'm not only going to recommend, or the lab is not only going to recommend, or your distributor is not only going to recommend, or your PCA or your CCA, it can be a combination of both a foliar applied and also a soil applied in order to make that correction. In this scenario, we actually used a product called OP8 because based on the history of these plants, rootstock was really what the problem was, is why we had this deficiency. And so what I wanted to get is a highly digestive microbial community at a very high level within that soil environment so that we could start making additional nutrition available to help support that root uptake and try and carry this plant through. So yeah, there was OP8, there was fish also used as a soil application at the same time we were doing the foliar application. And so, I look at that as being kind of very important of how these two things function together and how important that really was.
So was there a phosphorus component? You mentioned the phosphorus coming up. Was there a phosphorus component to the foliar spray itself, or what caused that foliar or that increase in tissue analysis for the phosphorus?
Well, I think the phosphorus came, there was a little bit of phosphorus obviously in stabilizing the fish, but I think the main phosphorus uptake was by eliminating the deficient or the excess in the plant to give the ability for that plant actually to uptake that phosphorus, and then also the digestive properties within that soil environment in order to get that phosphorus back into the plant, because it wasn't being blocked. The excessive iron was not causing a problem.
Okay, perfect. And I remember Bruce always talking about phosphorus being kind of the energy to drive it, and calcium being kind of the king, the gatekeeper, allowing those nutrients in. So as we make that soil application and allow that phosphorus and calcium to become more available, we're allowing that soil to then release more of the things we're actually after in the first place.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
So when we talk about that, you know, we looked at this picture, and obviously this is generally what we see based on when we see I need a foliar application, it's expressing a deficiency. So what happens, why is test don't guess so important? And I want to give you this example here. On the left, you see a wheat crop. You know, visually, as you take a look at this wheat crop as we drive down the field, it's a pretty darn good stand of wheat. It looks good, color's good, growth is good, it's even. I mean, really like this stand of wheat. But when we pull a leaf extract analysis on it and we start to talk and look at really what is going on in this plant, and again, this is a critical point of influence because we're determining what our yield is going to be at very close at this point within this wheat. And we see our chloride, if you see right in the middle of the screen, chloride old at 6,000 parts per million, chloride new at 2,900 parts per million. So we have an excess of chloride in the tissue of this plant. It's not being expressed based on a deficiency. We're not visually seeing that we have a deficiency in this plant. We wouldn't even know it had we not pulled the analysis. But what we see as we go through deeper into this, this leaf extract analysis is because of the high chloride, we have low phosphorus, well, not because of, but we also are expressing low phosphorus, calcium, iodine, and zinc. And when we start to talk about the antagonism of the chloride, we block calcium, iodine, and phosphorus. So there's a direct correlation of an excess in a plant, which is causing a deficiency, or at least making it harder for that plant to get what that plant really wants. And Steve just talked about how important phosphorus, calcium, how important those are to the plant. The interesting part about this, and one of the other tools that I want you to use based on a leaf extract or a plant sap analysis, is where is this chloride coming from? You know, we so often talk about excess of sodium, and I'll use that as an example. Because I always say if we have excess sodium in our soil, we need to identify where it's coming from before we can reduce it. Is it coming from our water? Is it coming from our fertilizer? How are we getting that sodium within our soil environment? Is it coming from our fertilizer applications? The same thing holds true. Where's all this chloride coming from? We need to stop the flow in so that we can, in the future, not have this same excess within the plant, within this growing community. And so a foliar application obviously was recommended here to try and address the deficiencies based on the excesses. And that's the whole way the foliar works. But now we need to take it to the next level of, why is that there? Is that piggybacking on with something else that I don't want, that I didn't know I was getting? Where's it coming from? So we now can start to do some of our homework to help reduce those excesses.
So the extract analysis is kind of like preventative maintenance. I mean, I think about if you have a plumbing problem at home, if you wait until you can see physical damage to the flooring, to the wall around you because of a leak, you have waited way too long. And that's kind of like what you saw with those Asian pears. If you wait until it's physically present, there's a good amount of damage already done. So kind of preventative, yeah?
Preventative. Yeah, it gives us, basically, this is our crystal ball. It's a way for us to look into the future. And that's really the way I look at it. Let's make some predictions. Let's make corrections early so that we can increase our quality and our yield. And a really good example of this was a persimmons orchard in California that we worked with for a couple of years. Previous program, basically had seen a 7-year decline in production in this block. Foliars were being used, soil applied were being used, but the grower was not taking any soil or tissue analysis. They were just doing what they thought the plant needed. In 2018, we started with our grower late, so we were able to do an addition of soil biology in the fall. And then we came back in the spring with the tissue and a soil analysis, and we added biology based on need. They had a phosphorus deficiency, so we were using Spectrum PSB. And then we went in with the foliar application based off of the tissue test, and working with the growers. Certified crop advisor was very willing to work with us. We made some changes in the foliar application. They needed calcium, they needed late season potassium for sizing. The cooler part about this is that season, 2019, the grower was really very excited because he had high quality fruit on his persimmons tree. For the first time, he had made Costco grade quality. They took almost all of his fruit. The other exciting part about it, the size was very uniform throughout the entire orchard, and he was able to go through that orchard and pick almost his entire crop with one pass. In the years past, the last 7 years, he was going through the orchard 3 and 4 times to get the fruit based on different sizing, different ripening schedules, when it was ready, because you need to pick it when it's ripe. And so this year he was able to get almost all of it. In fact, they wanted to start earlier, and they thought, well, if we wait just one more week, we will have basically all the fruit on these trees ready to come off. So it was very exciting. Now, the point I will make here is he needed calcium. So if we came in with something, with growers always tell me, well, the form of calcium you want me to use is too expensive. Calcium chloride's much cheaper. In the same scenario, if we came in with calcium chloride, in a scenario where we have excessive chloride already in the tissue of the plant, we're not going to get the calcium into the plant, we're blocking it. So really, we've created a greater problem, and we're not fixing what we really wanted to do by just using the form of nutrition that the plant really could use without piggybacking on something that the plant did not need. And that's really what I want to get at, is so often we need to look at not only the cost, but what form are we using and why are we using it in order to make it available.
And Dennis, you mentioned that these mature more evenly. Do we also sometimes see them mature more quickly?
Well, that was the other thing. He saw his fruit on that tree was ripe 2 weeks earlier than anybody else in the valley. So he was also one of the first to the packing shed to go to the grower.
What's that worth to a grower?
Well, and I see that all the time, whether I'm talking peaches or cherries. I'm always seeing is if we get the balanced nutrition to that plant, we see it ripening more evening. We don't have delay in harvest. It makes a world of difference. So let's talk about, we're into foliar availability. And this is the one thing I really want to stress based on what I just talked about, form and nutrition, because I hear it from growers all the time. Can I use this? Can I change this? And you can use any foliar nutrition you want as long as it is in a form that is available to the plant. And so it has to be soluble. It needs to be able to go into the plant. And I always recommend an amino acid chelate, okay? We need to get that mineral absorbed through the cuticle and through the leaf to eventually end up in the xylem and the phloem in order to make a difference in that plant. If we're not using a form of mineral that can be absorbed, we are not doing our plants any good. Now, are there ways around that you can use some humates and things like that in order to get this done? Yes. But generally, I say if you're using a good amino acid chelate, you're going to get the job done.
Well, and I like the picture you have there shows the epicuticular wax crystal. And part of the surface of that cuticle is generally kind of a negative charge, which can be great because that'll help bind up. Most of our applications are going to be cations, positively charged, so it can help hold on to that. The downside is kind of like magnets, the positive holds on to negative. So you can have a little bit of tie up and bind up there on the surface. And I did a presentation last year, the year before, that you can think about the cuticle as a solid layer, but that's not really what we see. At a microscopic level, the picture I use is kind of like chainmail, a suit of armor. you constantly have flux and flow and move, and the cells are moving and shifting, and as that plant is growing, you have microscopic pores form. So to get that fluid through, we don't have to have just stomata. Those materials, as long as they're wet, and that's another important thing that I think you're going to touch on here in a little bit, is maintaining a moisture and proper timing. But we're going to have some of that physical fluid flow through into the cells. But like you mentioned, a great way to do that is with the amino acid chelate. So chelate means claw, and you can kind of think about that. I kind of think about it sometimes like you've got a baseball and a mitt. That baseball goes inside the mitt, and it's basically hidden. It's gone. You can't see it. And that's what some of these amino acid chelates, that is what all of the amino acid chelates do, is they can take that and they can hide that charge, which can be a fantastic way for it to kind of trick the plants. If the plant doesn't see that divalent cation calcium, if it just sees basically the nitrate or the nitrogen in the amino acid form, plant is hungry for that nitrogen. It's going to gladly take up all that amino acid. In the meantime, the calcium goes along for the ride, and the beauty is, unlike most calcium forms, which will be deposited into the tissue, and once they're deposited, they're stuck. The plant is able to use xylem phloem. It's able to use its vascular system to transport that calcium throughout. So we see a great benefit by having those amino acid chelates in allowing the plant to more efficiently move materials, and not just mobile elements. We also see a benefit with non-mobiles, which can be really exciting and a great way to get those to the plant in different places, and especially at different times. If I'm a little late on my calcium uptake, I can get calcium out there a little more evenly and a little more easily.
Yep. And you know, one of the things I also want to talk about a little bit when we talk about foliar, and I kind of added it here because it really has to do with availability, is, you know, we talk about, I tell growers, especially when we start to talk about fruit trees, almonds, you know, we start walnuts, you know, we're always recommending an early foliar application, again, based on timing. And what we need to remember is we don't just need leaves in order for the plant to absorb nutrition. There's a lot of great research coming out there. We've been recommending this for years, but plants also absorb nutrients through their bark. And so early on in the season, when that plant's coming out of dormancy and we're at bud swell and we really don't have any leaves on that plant, again, a light foliar application of a needed nutrition that plant needs, basically a lot of times early in the year, I'm talking calcium, to get that into the plant, because right there at the bud, we're going to go into reproduction, and we need calcium for the cell division. That is the perfect time when that plant needs it. So a light foliar application early on at bud swell can make a tremendous difference in changing the availability of how much calcium that plant has.
So is that why a lot of farmers have dogs? Because the bark helps it get through?
Exactly.
Oh, perfect.
Exactly. If you put your dog, you know,
roll it in calcium.
Roll your dog in calcium and have it go out in the orchard and bark. You remember Sonic Bloom?
Oh,
same thing.
Man.
Yeah.
we're devolving pretty quick here.
Sorry, guys. So one of the things I talk about, I get the question all the time, you know, I want to do my foliar on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, I'm going to come through with my fungicide application. This is from Midwest Laboratories Handbook. It gives you a little bit of an idea. We can have a discussion on this, how quickly, based on plant, based on time of year, based on moisture, based on form, of the availability of nutrition. All of this can come true. It's going to change greatly, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. But this kind of gives you an idea. The plants are going to absorb different nutrients at different time based on different schedules, different growth stages, different temperatures. All of these are going to come in. But the biggest thing I want people to understand here is I always tell growers, when you do a foliar application, I want at least 3 to 5 days before we do anything else, okay? We don't want to do a foliar application and 2 days later come by with a fungicide or a copper application, because now we've just disrupted what we're trying to do based on nutrient absorption. So when we do foliar applications, let's do our foliars, let's give them time to work, then let's move on to our next application that we may need to do based on need of the plant. So with that being said, I didn't want to spend a lot of time on that, but I get that question asked so often, is 3 to 5 days. Let's give that a chance to function. And so successful foliar, this is just going to be some, I guess, just information to remind us when we're doing foliar applications. Timing of application is critical. So critical point of influence in that plant. Corn, we're talking V3, V4 stage. We want to be out there ready to do our foliar application. We talked about fruit trees at bud swell, petal drop, you know, once we've set fruit are all great times to make sure we're able to do our foliar nutrition, because timing is critical. Timing is king. Spray during the cooler part of the day, more humid time of the day. Obviously, as Steve talked about earlier, as long as we have moisture and that foliar application hasn't dried out, it's going to be available to the plant. Never during high heat or direct sunlight. Spray when wind is low, which is obvious. I talked a little about using caution when spraying plants under stress. They don't react the same as maybe a normal healthy plant would. And again, this goes back to test for the possibility of side effects. If we're spraying something that we're not familiar with or we have not tank mixed together. And then it's always advisable to try and get our pH to the spray down to around a 6.5. That has a lot to do with availability, but it also has to do with what I look at based on bicarbonates and water pH. So I'm just going to touch on this briefly. We talk about different forms of things we can do, RO systems, you know, water change. There's a lot of information out there. What works best for you, acid injection, sulfur burners, is up to you to do research and decide, or talk to your distributors or your CCA or PCA and find out what makes the most sense for you. But what I want to get at is if we can lower our pH down around a 6.5, we neutralize about half the bicarbonate within the water. So 0 to 100 is low. I rarely see that anymore in irrigation water. We're generally in the 100 to 180 to 180 to 600. So we need to look at that bicarbonate. As we talk about with calcium, if we have high bicarbonate, we tank mix calcium in there, that calcium bonds with other elements. It's now not available to the plant, okay? So all of these things are very important when we start to talk about foliar nutrition and why they may not function in the way that the grower expected them, the plant to respond. And so with that, when I was doing some research last year and kind of looking into foliar, I came across this article that was done July of 2011. That was really 2.5 years after Bruce had passed away. Anyway, this was a great article. It talked about what Bruce had said based on foliar potassium. And he talked about the nitrate often limiting the potassium availability at critical times, the importance of potassium application once we have fruit set, and really after harvest, and then carrying that through until the end of the season. And that's really where I see a significant difference, and that I learned from Bruce how important that is once we have harvested that plant, it is not time to stop. I've been talking about this for 20 years. That's the time that we really get started, because we can make a huge correction in that plant once we've harvested, depending on that plant and how much time we have before we lose the foliage on that plant. But the really interesting part about this is Bruce used to talk about the shortage might not be relevant to a conventional leaf analysis. And he was talking about the leaves being tested in an area which potassium moves. And so it's kind of cool on this, because I remember Bruce used to talk about this. And as I read this article, I thought that's really what we're talking about now, based on plant sap analysis or leaf extract analysis. Because Bruce used to say that if you tested the new leaf and an old leaf, and there was a 10% difference in that potassium, you were already falling behind, because you were already robbing the old leaf in order to support that crop. And so this was clear back in the late 90s that Bruce used to talk about this. And he used to have his handheld meters where he would do potassium tests in the field. But he really talked about the relevance of understanding how nutrition moved. And I just thought this was really cool when I talk about foliar applications, the importance of foliar, and how important testing is to identify deficiencies. So with that being said, I just briefly want to talk a little bit. Obviously, Steve had mentioned the importance of biology on the tissue of the plant and for available of nutrition into that plant. So anytime we're recommending a foliar application, I always recommend put a biological inoculum in with it. Put the Micro 5000, the PZ 1000, the Micro 5000 organic, put those in with it to help that plant utilize that nutrition, get that nutrition into the plant in the state the plant can use it. And then we also talk a little bit, a lot of the growers now are adding as just a little bump to the microbial inoculum of the 1000 and the 5000, a little bit of spectrum. 5 to 10 grams of spectrum in with it, is enhancing the nutrient availability and giving you those benefits based on the Phylosphere of the plant and helping that plant absorb nutrition. And so with that being said, I want to talk about one more gadget I'd like all of us to see. This is Cleve Baxter. If you guys remember, he did a lot on measuring pain on fruit. So, you know, anytime we look out there, if we don't want our plants to feel any pain, we don't want them under stress. So I think we all need to grab a meter and test for pain. Believe me, I've been through some orchards where I could feel the pain without any equipment. So I thought that was awesome. It just cracks me up. And with that, we'll go to questions.
Primary perception. Sorry, we're taking a second to look through, see if we can find any of the questions. See if there's any in there.
Okay. Let's see. My fungal bacteria. Okay, so one of the questions is here, my fungal to bacterial ratio is very low. How do I change that, make it more fungal dominated? And a lot of times I answer that question is, as we look at the food pyramid, the basis of that pyramid is beneficial bacteria. We have to build the bacteria profile. We have to change that soil structure in that environment in order to support the fungal community. And so I always say when we're talking about building a fungal community, we can't build a house without a foundation, okay? So if we have low carbon, we have low organic matter, we're doing tilling, we're doing all of these things, we can never build fungal within that soil environment. So we have to get the foundation, we have to build the environment in order to grow that fungal community, and then we can naturally move into a more dominant fungal community within that soil environment. A lot of that has to do with soil structure, crop that you're growing. There's a lot of variables here. If you'd like to kind of touch base with us after the webinar, we can maybe discuss that a little bit more of how that might be possible. I always give the example of when I was fly fishing in a river in Colorado that basically was a dead section of river. They would throw fish out there. The fish would live for a month or two and then they would all die because they did not have the structure and the environment in order to support them. Once they came in and rebuilt that structure, they put in riprap, they cleaned up the water, they got the sediments out of the water. We had aquatic life growing in there. We had bugs and insects. Now it's a gold medal stream. We change the environment in order to support the fish. That's really what we need to do in order to kind of change from a bacterial to a fungal dominate.
Your field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You know, what laboratory are we using for the leaf extract analysis? You know, what I generally recommend, there's a lot of labs out there doing it. So whatever your local distributor is comfortable with is what I say. I have some guys use tissue, some that leave plant sap analysis, some that use leaf extract analysis. I know Denali Labs is doing some Midwest, AEA, Apical. There's a wealth of labs out there that you can use. A lot of times I say, with the distributor you're dealing with, what are they most comfortable interpreting is always what makes the most sense, so that we can utilize that information that we're receiving. if you get that information and it cannot be interpreted, it does us absolutely no good, or we make a poor recommendation based on not understanding the lab information. So a lot of times I recommend, a lot of these labs now will actually, for an additional charge, give you a recommendation based on how they do it. A lot of times that makes sense to get also. Well, with that being said, I think we've taken way more than everybody's time today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please call us in the office. Send us an email, either myself or Steve. Our emails are available, and we really appreciate your time. It's we're getting into warm weather here in Washington anyway, and across the state. So let's keep growing, and we'll look forward to chatting with you soon. And let's get those foliar applications and that foliar 1,000 and 5,000 out on your plants and make corrections so that we can finish up this season strong. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Dennis. Everybody stay safe, wash your hands, and be safe out there. What's up, Jenny?
Thank you, guys. And to those of you who submitted questions, I will get an email off to you as soon as the webinar is over. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.